The life that we know is finished. Don't you agree? Yeah. And that's true.
In terms of figures, the projection would suggest that by the 31st of the 12th, 2029, we would have no more clubs left.
Is the UK still clubbing, or is the party over? The COVID pandemic brought record closures. And 5 years later, the nighttime industry still hasn't fully recovered. Since 2020, 419 clubs have closed in Britain. That's a third of all clubs. That was the promise that started keep cropping up.
With the cost of living, everything's got more expensive, so it was only like a matter of time before the events got a bit more expensive as well.
And club closures in the UK have continued to hit the headlines.
Small market town. 4 years on from me turning 18, there's now only one club open in my town.
Really?
Yeah, so in the last 4 years, about 5, 6 of them have closed, and there's now only one open.
The reason a lot of people come to university is...
Look how busy it is, and it's like, why is it closing if it's like this?
We saw a net decline of 2.8% across the board, which, as you can appreciate, is hugely challenging for the sector. We're talking about all nighttime economy businesses. About 7 out of 10 of them are either barely breaking even or losing money. Under the current decline in terms of figures, the projection would suggest that by the 31st of the 12th, 2029, we would have no more clubs left. In terms of figures, the projection would suggest that by the 31st of the 12th, 2029, we would have no more clubs left.
And it isn't just independent clubs that have closed. After Yorkshire, Wales has seen the most club closures since 2020. In 2024, the company which owns some of the UK's most of just over 2,000 18 to 30-year-olds found that nearly 2/3 of people were going out less frequently than the year before, with 68% of people saying the current economic climate had reduced how much they go out.
Not anymore.
Some of my friends' rent got tripled. Like, how are you meant to contend with that? Like, where's the protection against that as a cultural space?
You're right, all. So the first clip you watched there was from the BBC's documentary in 2016, The Last Whites of the East End, talking about how the demographics has changed beyond recognition in the East End of London from the old working class communities. But it's happened all across the country, as I'm sure you are well aware. And obviously we're talking nearly 10 years on from when that was made and released. And following that, there was a clip from a BBC, again, documentary. It was only a short one, about 15 minutes long, I think it was. Basically talking about how the nightclubs are dying off in the UK. So I'm finally getting around to putting this little video together. This was sort of spurred on by a video Carl Vernon made earlier. And he was talking about how all these areas where we used to get together and you kind of mingle and communicate, let your gripes go. You know, if you had a shit day at work, you can kind of talk it and laugh it off. Or if you're pissed off with politicians or the situation of the country, these areas are being slowly dismantled. But talking about the economics of it all, obviously beer's been made extremely expensive recently, and generally like the hospitality industry. And like Carl Vernon said, and like this chap in the last clip said, you know, the cost of living has obviously made that even more difficult. And this is happening across the Western world generally. Now I have to include my own personal experiences. So yesterday is a perfect example of when I was in Leicester. I went to a restaurant at the end of my day, as I often do, and I had spaghetti, some chips and a cider, and that was 32 quid. When I was in London at the start of the year, the pub next door to the Sherlock Holmes Museum, for anyone who knows it, on Baker Street, can't remember what it's called. It might be the Sherlock Holmes, to be fair. But I had fish and chips and a pint in 26 quid. And that's pretty much the same. I mean, I remember when I was in Greenwich, you know, at the end of my day in Greenwich, I went to an Italian, because I often go to Mediterranean restaurants, to be honest. So I went to an Italian restaurant, had a pizza and a pint. I think that was about 25 quid as well. So you imagine if that's for a family of you. You know, I'm just a single bloke, just a bloke on his own, you know, doing all this. And to be fair, I'm on a good wage. You know, I am on a really good wage, to be fair. Can't complain. I haven't got many outgoings either. So I'm quite fortunate in that regard, but you can see now this young generation. I feel so bad for them. I'm going to cover this now, actually. So a couple of weeks ago when I was driving up the A1, I pulled over at a hotel, and I stopped off at this old sort of barn-looking hotel. It was really nice. I can't quite remember the name off the top of my head, but there's a lad in there who's only sort of 19, 20 years old, and we started chatting, and he was unbelievable. You know, it was a mixed race lad. You know, because I have to throw it in there because I say if something bad happens, I include the black, so I'm going to be positive this side. He's mixed race. And we were chatting, and his knowledge was unbelievable. He didn't get jabbed. He was looking up all the shit in the sky every day. You know, he was so aware. I think his dad might have been black, actually. Apparently, his dad was the one who kind of opened his eyes up to all this stuff. And but, yeah, it's got to be said, he was just so aware. But what really saddened me was the fact he was 19 years old talking about this sort of stuff. It's just the speed this generation's having to grow up. And they haven't got much prospects and opportunities for the future, really, have they? You know, it must be so grim. Like I've got a relative who's only 18 years old or 17 years old. And you just think, what's the future going to be like for them? You know, at least when I was 18, 19, and it was sort of 2006, 2007. I was so lucky because I grew up in the 90s as a kid. You know, technology was creeping up. Walkmans, CD players. What are they called? I can't remember. The little tube sort of iPod sort of things, just before the iPods came in. But MP3s, I think it might be. Yeah, so all this sort of technology was gradually evolving. You know, I started Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1s, PlayStation 2s. The internet didn't really become a thing until the early 2000s, where households, if you were fortunate enough to get one of them massive computers with the huge modems and the AOL dial-up in its early days, before all this social media thing really started kicking in. You know, we have the AOL chat rooms. But this generation now, you know, like, I know they've got access to everything at their fingertips, but you've also got the double-edged sword. This stuff hasn't been brought in to help us out. It's here to entangle us in digital ID, which is obviously the next thing that's coming in. It's there to kind of monitor and survey everywhere you are. You know, your iPhones. It's no coincidence that you might be talking about something and then minutes later, what have you been talking about crops up in the adverts. You know, because you're being surveyed like 1984 style. Surveillance capitalism, I think they call it. And but this generation now, they're just born into this world of mass technology, and you have to go along with it. And kids in primary schools probably on iPads and surrounded by wireless technology and electromagnetic frequencies, and no one really knows if that's good for us or bad for us. I'm going to say it's probably bad, having all this stuff surrounding us all the time. But yeah, just the generation coming through. That's before you mention the outlook people have nowadays. People have got such a gloomy outlook, and rightly so. You know, if you walk down a town or a city now, depending on which town or city you're in, admittedly, but shops boarded up everywhere and pubs closing down and nightclubs shutting down. As it says in this little documentary here by the BBC, it's projected that all nightclubs will be closed by 2030. So my generation, the millennials, we really knew that last world where you could go for a night out. You know, it's very rare there was any stabbings, or crime was quite low, you know, but certainly things like stabbings, if one of them happened, it'd be huge. But let's face it, it's all the time now, isn't it? You know, I was only just looking at Peterborough to see if they've got any homecoming parades for their EFL Cup win through the town. And this a story of two lads involved in a stabbing only recently. You know, towns and cities are becoming like something out of some dystopian sci-fi movie. Like that night out in Colchester back in November time, I think it was, or December last year. And I just thought it was really sad, you know, because I'd say I've got fairly decent eyes to see what's going on around me. You know, like when I come out of what was the old Hippodrome when I was a kid, you know, when I was 18, 19, it used to be heaving in there Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. It was Tuesdays. It was always busy. Yates was rammed. Wigan Pen was busy. All these pubs were sort of busy and bustling. And the Wigan Pen, which is now the Camelodunum, you could barely move in there. And nowadays, it's pretty much empty, to be honest. But yeah, speaking to a bunch of young lads in the Attic, or a Trilogy it's called now. It used to be the Hippodrome. It's been the Hippodrome, Liquid and Envy, the Attic, which shut, and then it reopened as a Trilogy. But it was sad speaking to them young lads upstairs in the smoking area, and they were just looking around, same as me, thinking this country is knackered. You know, like there's barely any English people as we walked in either. It's all R&B stuff. You know, as you walk in, it's all Africans, and you know they've messed it up so badly as well. They've made the dance floor so condensed, whereas in the past it had a big open area. But it's all like controlling the movement of people, and when you walk in, you have to go through them stupid scanners, like airports style scanners. And when I walked out, you got the shut down M&S opposite. Yeah, there's a shut down shop next door to it. It's crap, it really is. But Derby isn't any better at all. In fact, Derby's probably worse in some ways. There's much more boarded up shops there. So yeah, I just feel sorry for this modern generation. Going back to that young lad, you know, at 19, to be talking about all this stuff is such heavy topics for someone that young. But yeah, I do feel for this generation coming through now, I really do. I know and we also get a lot of grief as well, don't they? Like Gen Z and all that, and snowflakes, and there's plenty of tough lads still amongst them, and you know there'll be some feminine women amongst them as well. But yeah, I think the millennials, we were that last bit of the candle really, as the wax kind of burnt out, because it's you know the world we know in the 90s and the noughties, it's pretty much gone now, if we're honest. Whether we can turn things around, I don't really know. We've certainly got some major, powerful interests working against us, and you'd have to be very naive to believe that this is all happening by accident, especially after everything that's happened between 2020 and 2022. If you haven't looked back now and thought something just doesn't add up about all this. But and that's before you mention the fact that since the events of 2020 and 2022, things have never really returned to normal, because the things that came in afterwards, the cost of living, the Ukraine-Russia business, the Palestine-Israel business, the migrant hotels, it just seems 2020 was a real, this is it now. So I remember Y2K, or the panic that was around Y2K. To me, you know, I was only about 12 years old then. I wasn't worried about it, but why should I be at that age? But looking back, I think 2020 would make more sense. Say for example, if you're doing you're setting all your watches off at the same time, you'll give people a warning, you know, as you come up to that significant marker, you know, like say if you're setting your time at 1958 or whatever. So for example, if you're leading up to it, you're building up to 2000 up to 2020, and then onwards it's 2021, 2022. You're kind of moving into this new world that they've kind of been laying the foundations for between 2000 and 2020, and before that, to be fair. 2020 to me was definitely a strong marking point that they must have used in their little occult world, you know. And it also began on March 22nd. Obviously that's Skull and Bones 322 after all. So going back to the thing that things haven't really gone back to normal since. A good example that I read in the comments on Carl Vernon's video, Chippies. So for example, my local Chippy now shuts at 9 o'clock, whereas in the past it was 10 o'clock, and that'll be down to the heating costs. There aren't as many people using it nowadays either. Still busy, but not to the same extent as it was in the past. But again, that's another post-2020 thing, and I hate to say it, but I've seen plenty of news reports where with all this winter, for example, the cost of electricity and heating's all gone up, as we know, on April the 1st. that won't really start impacting people till later on in the year. So this winter will be a pretty, excuse me, that's a cider kicking in, will be a pretty bad one, because that's when all the heating and electricity bills, you know, obviously will people will start to feel the impact of it, whether it be in their homes, whether it be the businesses, pubs, which are already struggling as it is, and then obviously if people are struggling to afford to heat their homes, you know, obviously they can't really afford to go out and have the hospitality luxuries that we did in the past. So it's grim. It is grim, but you just got to stick with it, I guess, haven't you? I suppose for the time being, all you can do is try and offer a solution of some sort. Just try and do the right thing if you can. So if you can use cash where you can, when this digital ID thing comes in, which is the next thing they're going to try and do, try and go against that. It is extremely difficult how they've made this. It's all crisscrossing, and it's like a game of chess where, well, checkmate obviously. So yeah, use cash where you can, try and fund local businesses where you can. But I don't know. I think that's about it. I wasn't really intending for that long ramble, and but it just adds some context to why I put these clips together. So that's it. Cheers.